Well, Cast Nation, I am bringing back the one and only Dr. Jason Fung. I have lost track of how many times he's authored books here, but he's means a lot in my world because of how much he's changed my perspective when it came to nutrition, when it came to the impact our patients have to be able to take agency in their own health, reversing metabolic syndrome. It started with his content for me. So whenever I get Jason on the show, to me, this is huge. So Dr. Jason Fung, welcome back, my friend.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Quadra. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. You've been busy, my friend. You are just came out with the Hunger Code, which has been a fantastic read. In so many words, what is this book offering? What motivated you to write the Hunger Code?
Well, it was sort of a takeoff from the Obesity Code. So the Obesity Code was really sort of talking about how weight gain. So weight gain, which causes type 2 diabetes, which leads to metabolic syndrome and a lot of bad problems like heart disease and strokes and kidney disease and all kinds of bad issues, right? So it's sort of the root cause. And I think my impetus to write that was that we had been taught as physicians to that it's all calories, 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 but it's not actually. The body doesn't run on calories, it runs on hormones, and that's what tells our body what to do. And so the obesity code is really talking about how the insulin particularly, but the hormones really drive weight gain. And the calories are the result of the whole gaining weight rather than the cause of it. But it wasn't actually complete. And I started to realize this as we were just working with a lot of people, because for a lot of people, it wasn't that you know, it wasn't the hunger that was driving it wasn't the sort of hormones themselves that were just driving the overeating. There's a lot of emotional component and a social component to it, which is actually quite important. So as I started to sort of look into this further, it sort of went into the sort of other aspects. Because if you think about it from a very simplistic standpoint, if you think about the problem of overeating, you say, okay, well, if you're overeating and that's what causes weight gain, okay, fine. Um, well, why are you eating, right? And you eat because you're hungry, and you stop eating when you're full. But what you quickly realize is that if that's all there was to it, our body should be very finely attuned, and therefore, you eat, you stop eating, you get full, you stop eating, and therefore you should maintain a good weight. And that was true for many, many years, right? Up until the sort of 70s. But something sort of went off. And so it wasn't simply this homeostasis that was off. That's one of the things we talk about, homeostasis, which is this fancy word for balance, right? The body always tries to balance. It was that people also had not just this physical hunger, but also sort of an emotional hunger. And the idea is that when you eat, it's not simply for sustenance, right? We try to pretend like the only reason we're eating is because we need nutrition. No, that's not even close. There's lots of different reasons people eat. One of them is to feel better. So there's a whole emotional component to it. So there's all these emotional eaters. There's comfort eaters. So you have foods like comfort foods, for example, and you eat them not because you're physically hungry, but because they make you feel better, right? So you break up with your girlfriend, boyfriend, you eat a tub of ice cream, right? You're not actually hungry in the physical sense, but you're eating because you have this sort of emotional upset, and eating because it's pleasurable satisfies this, right? And in some cases, it can actually be the dominant sort of reason why people are overeating, but it's not a physical thing, right? And then there's a whole social component to it too, because and so you know, for example, I remember a few times where I was actually not that hungry, but because I was going out for dinner, I ate, right? And it's like I could have happily not eaten because I was sort of full already and stuff. But because I was going out, I went to a restaurant, nice restaurants, but then I had a full meal eating, and then you finally just, you just sort of get in the habit, you sort of finish your dinner. It's like, that's odd because I actually didn't need it from a physical standpoint, but because of the social situation, this is what happened. So I sort of break that down into sort of three big types of hunger. So you have the homeostatic hunger, which is driven by the hormones, and that's what the obesity code was about. You have this emotional hunger, which is when you look into the literature, it's actually called hedonic hunger. And then there's a social hunger, which is, again, if you look in the literature, it's called conditioned hunger. And all three of these can drive the problem with eating. So if your problem is that you're an emotional eater, then you have to address the emotions. Your problem is that you're a social eater, then you have to drive that social condition, right? Rather than looking at it just from a purely hormonal standpoint, which is the homeostatic hunger, which is that sort of physical hunger. So it sort of gets into this sort of deeper understanding of eating behavior, which drives us because for a lot of people, and I was talking to some of the people. So at the fasting method, we work with a lot of people. And so I was talking to the head of the coaching program, and she's a PhD in psychology. And she was saying, I think the physical hunger actually drives very little of the problems with eating. I think it's like 85% social and emotional. And I say, I kind of agree with that, right? There's lots of people and who eat not just because they actually need to eat, like they physically have that hunger that they need to eat. It's really driven by these other things. Very few of us. So if I do some fasting sometimes. So when you're fasting, you do actually feel that hunger. And I realize that very few people actually know what it feels like to be really, really hungry from that physical standpoint because most of us have easy availability to food. And so that's the sort of reason I wrote the book because I actually think there's a lot more to it than what I explored in the Obesity Code. So it goes into a lot of these other issues. And the emotional part, the hedonic hunger, goes into issues of ultra processed food, which I actually think is one of the more critical topics we discussed today, and food addiction, which is another area of sort of this massive area of research coming up. Both food addiction and ultra processed foods are these areas that are very, there's a lot of research coming out, and the more research that comes out, the more you realize is, hey, this is actually pretty important because I think a lot of ultra processed foods, drive us to eat because they've been engineered to make us eat. Not because we're hungry, but because they actually satisfy it. They make us feel good, right? You think about a Cheeto or something like that, right? Nobody actually needs to eat a Cheeto. You don't actually even feel full when you eat a Cheeto, right? You can eat a whole bag and you don't feel full. But you get this sort of pleasure from eating it, and it can actually go so far as to become an addiction. And you see that some people are completely addicted to these ultra processed foods.
Yeah, Jason, I really love this because it shows an evolution in your assessments. Like, as you mentioned, you go from the hormonal aspect of things, now evolving into the emotional, the food addiction. I think it's because like we like to always try to put things into a box, like one box. In
Yeah.
fact, that is what we tend to do. And something as complex as this, obviously there's going to be layers. And to me, it just allows us as clinicians to be that much more complete when we assess our patient. Maybe their insulin, maybe they maybe they're just like they're eating too much food and or their ratio of macros is off and that's what's leading to it. Maybe it's the food addiction, maybe it's the emphasis on ultra processed food. But now knowing what we know, it allows us to be more complete when we chat with our patients and try and get them into a healthier state. So I just want to, number one, highlight this is excellent to highlight. But the second part, I think we underappreciate the what ultra processed foods do. Like you were mentioning it here. Like, but just to reemphasize, you're never getting full. You got no macronutrients. You got no micronutrients either. If you think of the Cheetos example or Doritos, they they taste delicious, so it draws you in. And so to me, this is one of the biggest concerns when it comes to whether it's food addiction, whether it's emotional eating. Like it's a big bucket that we need to tackle.
I completely agree because, the thing is that you look at other countries in the world. And so the United States has a lot of good data. And by some estimates, 60 to 70% of the diet of a lot of Americans is ultra processed foods, right? And you see that, this is a problem because there should be a normal homeostatic mechanism, right? So, our bodies are terrific and they're full of these homeostatic mechanisms. What that means is that, if your body always tries to set, a normal. So if you have a normal body temperature, gets too hot, you sweat, right? And you cool down, right? Or it gets too cold and you shiver and you warm up, right? So your body is always trying to maintain that. And people always say that, oh, body fat is just calories in, calories out, as if those extra calories just get dumped into body fat like a sack of doorknobs, right? It's like, but that's not how the body works, right? Why would the body, like everything is controlled, right? Your thyroid hormone, your body temperature, right? All this is controlled within very narrow limits, right? Body fat is completely mission critical, right? You never see morbid obesity in wild animals. Why? Because body fat is very important to survival. If you have an animal in the wild that's too fat, guess what? It's going to die, right? If it's a predator, can't catch anything, it's going to slim down. If you're a prey animal, you're fat, you can't run, you're going to die. If you're too skinny, same thing. It's winter, you die, right? Because you haven't stored enough calories as body fat. So how much body fat we carry is not like oh, hey, it's just rando, we can do whatever, right? No, you can't do whatever. In order for a species to survive, it must always control almost every aspect, and body fat is no different, right? So why is it that people over history have been able to maintain their body weight within relatively normal limits, right? Because again, if you think about homeostasis, think about how many calories you eat in a day, right? Say it's 2,000, right? Times 365 days in a year, 60, 70,000 calories. And most people, even now, they gain like 1 pound a year, right? So they're actually eating within sort of like 98% accuracy, 99% accuracy of what you're eating, and burning of calories is still matched to like within 99%. How can you do that if you have no idea how many calories you're eating and how many calories you're burning, right? That's a completely impossible task. So your body automatically has to adjust. And that's that homeostasis. So what's thrown it off, right? And ultra processed food is probably the one thing that has thrown it off. You look at other countries, right? So Italy, for example, or Japan, first world countries, highly developed, and they have way lower rates of obesity, right? Is it because they have, way more willpower? No, like Americans, Canadians, we all have good willpower, right? It's not like Japanese and Italians have more. The difference, of course, is the social environment, but also the level of ultra processed foods. Like in Italy, they have much less ultra processed foods than we do. Same as Japan, right? They have some. It's not like they have zero, but they have much less. Like everything in North America is sort of processed and comes in a box sort of thing. And if it's not coming in a box, they're trying to get you to buy it in a box, right? So the whole thing is that your body knows how to handle natural foods. You eat natural foods, right? Vegetables, meats, and all that. You eat a certain amount, then you get full, so you stop, right? But that doesn't happen with ultra processed foods. You have no stopping signal, right? You can just keep going, keep going, keep going. Same thing, if you're not hungry, it's not like you're going to go out and fry a couple of eggs just for fun, right? But you might open a bag of Cheetos, right? Completely, like absolutely, right? And that's that whole emotional hedonic side of things, because when you do that, of course, you light up all these reward centers in the brain. It's a pleasurable activity. It's like, I don't know why we pretend that eating is not pleasurable. Of course it's pleasurable. That's why we do it, right? But if you have this sort of unnatural stimulation of pleasure and no break on it, so remember, like when you eat fish, it's delicious, but you can't just keep eating it because there's this natural satiety hormones, right? And we know all about satiety hormones, GLP-1, GIP, cholecystokinin, there's the stretch receptors in the stomach. There's all these satiety signals, and processed foods finds a way to get around all of that. Why? It's not by accident, right? It's because the food companies know that if you're creating a food and it's going to make somebody really full, well, you're not going to sell much of this food, right? So what do? You take away all the satiety signals, right? You take away the fiber, you take away the protein, you take all that away. Then what you do is you try and make them light up the reward centers, right? So you find the precise, ratio of salt and sugar and fat. Then you add your artificial chemicals, your artificial flavoring, artificial colors, you got your texturizers, your emulsifiers, and you create this perfect food for selling, except it makes people fat. Why? Because it's lighting up the reward signals like crazy with no break on the end, right? So people are eating this, eating this, eating this, eating this, right? And it's like they don't know when to stop. because it's been engineered for you to not stop, right? So the ultra processed food's like a massive, massive, massive problem.
Do you think there's other, not to go off the rails here, but do you think there's other issues around ultra processed food? Like we know that it's linked to shorter lifespan, but like, do you think there's other consequences that maybe aren't top of mind aside from just being bigger and all these things? Or do you think it's mainly derived from being metabolically unhealthy?
I think there's probably a lot that we simply don't know about. I mean, take the example of trans fats, right? This should be a huge cautionary tale, right? So the whole thing was in the 70s, people said eat low fat, eat low fat, eat low fat. And then they said eat less saturated fat. So butter, of course, was saturated fat. So butter, which people have been eating for thousands of years, a completely natural food that people have been eating for thousands of years through antiquity, without any problems. They said, well, it causes heart disease, right? It's like, oh, okay, well, for thousands of years, it's fine. Now it causes heart disease. I wonder why. So then they told people to eat margarine, right? Margarine was full of trans fats. Why? Because when you take vegetable oil, which is polyunsaturated fats, they go rancid very quickly because of the double bonds and the polyunsaturated structure of the fats. So you partially saturate that fat by hydrogenating it, which stabilizes it. So you get hydrogenated oils, right? And if you remember, a lot of times you'd read ingredient list, it'd be like partially hydrogenated sunflower oil or something like that. That's a trans fat. So you basically got these trans fats, which eventually people figured out was causing lots and lots of heart attacks. And it's because it was an unnatural fat that our body didn't know how to handle. So here's the completely ironic part, which I don't know why nobody seems to talk about. But in the 70s and 80s, as I was growing up, all of us were eating margarine, not because it tasted good, it tasted gross. But we thought that you would have less heart disease. But because they're actually full of trans fats, they're actually causing heart disease. So not only do we not get less heart disease, we got more heart disease. And the American Heart Association estimates it was an estimated 100,000 extra heart attacks every year. Like, isn't that ridiculous? Like, instead of preventing heart attacks, we're causing heart attacks, and we're doing it by eating margarine, which is way grosser than anything, like natural butter, right? Which was this sort of conceit that, oh, we can make these artificial foods that are better for you than real foods, but you can't, right? And that's only the best example. So what's the consequence of the xanthan gums and the carrageenans and the artificial colors and stuff, right? We don't know. They're just not that well studied. But I bet you there's going to be a huge amount of issues if you were to study it enough. And nobody has any incentive to study
Incentive.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's because it's money, right? So the food companies are busy trying to stuff all these chemicals into our foods because it makes it cheaper, makes it taste better, makes it more rewarding. All of this stuff, but we don't know the effect of all this stuff. Like, has there been a large-scale study to say that xanthan gums and guar gums and stuff are safe? I don't think so. I mean, at least not a well-documented large-scale study that said, hey, this is actually safe for us to eat.
Yeah. The reason I thought about it too is I interviewed somebody that I forget what her title was, like a dietitian from the UK, and she was highlighting how there was way less additives in European foods. Like even if you were to choose the same cereal, but if you were to see the one from US versus the European version or the Italian version, there's way less ingredients in the European one. And then she was tying it to allergies, autoimmune disease, which I think most of that's anecdotal, but it's interesting to think about that. Like I feel we should probably pay more attention to this stuff because, as you said, we've already seen the negative impacts that it's having on our metabolic health.
Well, think about, autoimmunity is a perfect example. You have a rising rates of autoimmune disease, right? So celiac disease, for example, is actually going up. And some people have argued that, it's just better recognized. And it's not, because they've actually done studies where they've gone back and looked at old blood samples from, army recruits and stuff. And they basically looked at it and said, how many are gluten sensitive? And I think that it's like 10 times more common now, right? Gluten sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
And autoimmune diseases, all of them are going up. Like if you look at LADA, which is latent autoimmune disease in adults, it's actually the incidence is rising quite sharply. And that's an autoimmune disease, right? So it's like, okay, well, all of this, a lot of the skin diseases, like incidence is just rising quickly. It's like, why is that, right? It's like that. There's something going on there. And then you look at these cancers that are happening in young people, right? So colon cancer, great example. It's well documented that the number of young people that are being diagnosed with cancer is going up and up, right? They had to drop the average, in the
Screening.
US, the screening time for used to be age 50. They had to move it down to 45 because you're missing so many young people with colon cancer. And it's like, what is causing that? I don't know, but it's a possibility that it's all that ultra processed foods because I have a feeling just like these like the trans fats basically had no data before they threw it into the food supply. A lot of this other stuff has no data either. They're just generally recognized as safe. It's like, okay, but you never actually studied it, so you don't know. So I'd rather not if I can avoid it, right? And that's the real problem, that it permeates the food supply and then there's no way to sort of get around it. That's a real problem.
Yeah, the train's out of the station for sure.
Yeah.
So getting back to, as you put in the book, is like it's not just like what or when you eat, but also why you eat. Emotional aspect of food, consuming food, or just the one thing I see in my kids, sometimes it's just boredom even that people will go towards food. Is there an approach or a way that we could get a better handle on this?
Yeah, and that's sort of the way I break it down. The sort of homeostatic hunger, the physical hedonic hunger, and then the social, which is the conditioned hunger. Conditioned hunger is very interesting because it's a social phenomenon. So essentially, if you're conditioned to eating, so conditioning is a term from psychology where you compare two things together. So the classic example being Pavlov's dogs. So if you ring a bell and you bring dogs food. When you bring dogs food, they'll salivate, right? They'll get hungry, they'll salivate. That's a natural response. If you ring a bell and then give them food, very soon they'll pair the two so that when you ring a bell but don't give them food, they'll also salivate, right? So you've conditioned that response, right? That's the conditioned stimulus and the conditioned response. The thing is that if you pair those two things together, then you're creating hunger with the bell by pairing it consistently with the food. But you think about all the stuff that we do now, right? So you eat when, in the car, you eat, because it's after school. You have bedtime snacks. You eat in front of the TV. You eat at the movie theater. You eat at the sporting events. You eat like even in between halves of a soccer game, right? I always thought the stupidest thing with the kids, right? So it's like, all of a sudden, you've paired food to everything. You go to the mall, you eat. You have billboards with food. You go to a meeting and somebody ordered cookies, right? Now you go to a meeting and you're all like, where's the
Where's the
cookies?
cookies?
Right? And these medical conferences, they're the worst, right? There's breakfast, then there's a mid-morning snack, then there's lunch, then there's the afternoon snack, and then there's dinner, right? It's like, why exactly do you need to eat that much? You're sitting in a damn room, right? You're not
You're not active,
exercising.
and like look what you get for breakfast too, like muffins
Yeah,
and like nothing with any protein in it for sure.
exactly. And that's doctors' conferences. You've been to them, I've been to them, right? It's absolutely ridiculous, right? Why do you need to do that? But hey, if you don't do that, we've been conditioned to expect that, right? So the whole point is that now you're actually creating hunger because now you go to your car. Hey, where's my, drink that I'm going to put in my drink holder? You go to the movies. Hey, where's my popcorn? You go to the sporting event. Hey, where's my hot dog? Right? So now you're creating hunger because you've paired it all through. And that's a real problem because you're creating that new hunger simply by the condition. And there's tons and tons of data. So I point out a couple of them where, if you look at the social determinants of obesity actually spreads much more like a virus than anything else. You trace these because if your friend becomes obese, your own risk of obesity skyrockets. Why? Not because it's a transmissible virus, it's because what they do influences what you do. That's called social norms, right? So this is what's normal, what's considered acceptable, right? And that's why influencers are so important because they set these sort of social norms, right? But now the norm is that you eat all the time, anywhere you go. In the 70s, you couldn't eat. You could only eat at a table. Again, consider two different conditions. In the 70s, you have a meeting in the mid-afternoon, you're super bored. Do you like go up and, exit, go out, get yourself a cookie, come back? People will be looking at it like, what the hell are you doing? Of course you wouldn't. Just sit there and be bored. But now, in the 2020s, you're in a meeting, you're super bored, somebody's ordered cookies. So now all of a sudden it takes a huge amount of willpower to not eat that cookie, right? In the other case, in the 70s, it took a huge amount of willpower to get a cookie. Well, that's a big difference, right? Because you didn't want that cookie. You know that cookie's not good for you, but you're bored. So now you've got the social, acceptability to eat in the meeting. And you've got this hedonic hunger because you're bored and you want a little pick-me-up, so you go get yourself that cookie that you didn't want and you know you didn't need and you know it's not good for you, right? But the difference is not the person. The difference is the social situation, right? And if you know that, then you can start to set guardrails for yourself and for others to say, what I'm going to do is cut out snack. Instead of pairing food and TV at night, I'm going to pair tea. I'm going to have some tea. I'm going to have green tea. I'm going to have herbal tea. I'm going to have an iced green tea at night. It's something, right, that takes your mind off of that. So you can once you start to identify, hey, why am I eating? Right? That's the real question. Why am I eating? Is it because I'm actually hungry, that I need it? I need these nutrients? Or is it because I'm bored? Is it because of the social situation? Is it because of conditioning? So all of these other things, because the first step, of course, is to identify the reason that it's happening in the first place. And it's the same thing. Like if you go to Japan, for example, you can't eat anywhere you want. It's considered a real faux pas, right? So you can't walk around the streets and eat. That's considered very rude. So you don't, because you don't want everybody staring at you. Well, that's great. Because if you're all of a sudden tempted to eat something in the middle of the street or whatever, you won't, because there's all this pressure on you to not, right? So it's not just the sort of, it's not just the hormones. It's actually a lot more than that. And it's a lot more this, the hedonic hunger, the conditioned hunger that we don't actually think about so much. Like, when people talk about obesity and stuff, it's all calories, calories, calories. And then it's all about what you eat. It's like, well, what about the emotional side of things and what about the social side of things? Because they actually play a very big role in determining why we're eating.
One thing you mentioned, Jason, I think is important because there's going to be a lot of pressure in those situations. You're going to be in a social environment. You're not hungry, but hey, how come you're not eating? Hey, like, let me grab you something to eat. Like, there's always going to be those social pressures. There's going to be the temptation in, like, when you're bored, especially if you're keeping the stuff in the house that aren't great for you. But the thing that, I like to try and tell people that ask me is, like, think about what could be substituted. I think that was that example of, instead of grabbing that highly caloric drink or that snack, thinking about that tea, thinking about that other substitute that could really, that's not ultra processed or minimally ultra processed or something. And that way that you're going to be that much further ahead. Because to be honest with you, in the current environment in 2026, it's hard to avoid all this, for lack of a better word, temptation.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that if you think about the 70s, is an interesting time, because if you wanted an after school snack, your mom would say, no, you're going to ruin your dinner. And if you wanted an after dinner snack or before bedtime snack, she said, no, you should eat more at dinner. So the idea is not that you shouldn't eat or you shouldn't be full. It's that you should fill up on the good stuff that you get with dinner.
Amen.
Not the snacky, ultra processed food, right? Because those snacks always wind up being ultra processed because it's convenient, right? So there's so many different ways that the ultra processed foods just sort of slip right in there, right? And it's become so institutionalized that we should be snacking, right? It's completely ridiculous, right? So when my kids were in school, I once got a note that said, please send 2 snacks with your kids because we're going on a school trip, right? And they're going to be home by like 4:30. I'm thinking, why do they need 2 snacks? Like, are they not eating lunch, or am I not giving them dinner, right? Tell me which one it is, right? Because if it was my mom, she'd be like, what the hell? Don't eat. Like, just wait till you get home and then you're going to have dinner, right? Why are you giving two snacks, right? And the same thing, I don't know if it's still like this when my kids were young. We joined soccer, right? And the parents would all take turns bringing snacks for in the middle of the game. I remember thinking, okay, I used to play soccer. You're so into the game that you could just keep playing, right? When you have a break in the middle, you drink a bit of water, then you just want to go back to playing. So we chase around these kids with some juice and cookies. Why? Why do we do that? Right? It's completely ridiculous, but it shows you how completely institutionalized snacking has become. And then we go, oh, I wonder why our kids are all getting fat. It's like because you're giving them all these ultra processed foods and all these snacks. You've beat it into their head since they were kids that they must eat all the time. But they don't. Think about it from a purely physiologic manner, right? Your body stores food energy, which is calories, in the form of glucose or fat, triglycerides. So you have plenty of energy. Why do you need to snack? Your body has thousands of calories that it could draw on if you wanted to, right? You could run a marathon and still not run out of energy because your body holds enough, right? 1 pound of body fat is going to be 3,500 calories, enough for 2 full days of not eating. That's just 1 pound of body fat, right? That's ridiculous. You can run a whole marathon and not eat and you still have enough, right? If you had 2 pounds of body fat, you could do that. So this idea that, oh, you shouldn't even go if, you ran for like 10 minutes and picked weeds for a few minutes, at the soccer game, and you need cookies and juice? Like, what is this? This is completely ridiculous. Purely from a physiologic medical standpoint. It's so far off the charts of medically necessary. Like, it's just ridiculous. But nobody ever says, hey, that's stupid, right? It's this idea that you must snack all the time. That's just stupid.
Yeah, I mean, it's come a long way. And I mean, I was of the era, you're of the era where there was an argument, especially for athletes, or maybe it was just for the general public, actually, that you want a snack so it maintains your metabolism and all this kind of horse manure that actually, when you say it out loud, doesn't really make sense. But I mean, this is what's great right now is how much the nutrition space is evolving. I mean, you and I both went to medical school. We didn't learn any of this shit. We didn't learn anywhere near this stuff. And now you're seeing more and more of us, people with credentials, people that have studied what's out there and have the capacity to think critically, to say, hey, let's rethink the way we eat. Let's rethink what we're putting in our bodies because we need to do better. Like, I forget the stat, like, was it 87 or 93% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy? Like,
Yeah.
we have work to do, but what's exciting though is like people are taking agency now. Like I mean, I don't know how many people you must have found throughout your social media career, especially, like more and more people are coming to you than ever before looking for help. And that's what's pushing me these days, is that people are ready for change, and now we can provide them with the tools, just like the hunger code.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, people want to be healthy. That's the bottom line, right? And I think it's funny because I always think this is crazy because if, when the doctor said, check your blood pressure, right? People check their blood pressures because they don't want to be sick, right? Or we said, check your blood glucose so that you can pick these things up, get your colonoscopy. People do it, right? Because they're not stupid and these things sort of make sense, right? But then we say, oh, but people got fat because they didn't listen to us. It's like, of course they listened to us. We just told them the wrong thing, obviously, because we told them to cut their calories, right? This whole idea that you must eat all the time to keep your metabolism stoked, but yet when you get fat, it's because you ate too much, right? It's like, but which one is it, right? It's like, if you're going to eat all the time, do you keep your metabolism up or do you get fat, right? Like, you don't get to choose that, right? And I always think this emphasis on calories is most of the problem because this idea, I think it's so easy to disprove, right? So if you say body fat is a store of calories equals calories in minus calories out, that's fine. That's always true, but it doesn't mean what people think it means, right? If you simply rearrange the terms and say calories in equals body fat plus calories out, right? So the amount of calories that you eat equals body fat plus what you expend, right? That's pure algebra, just moving around the terms. But what it tells you is that for every calorie you eat, your body can either store it as fat or it can burn it as energy. But which one does it do? That's the important thing. Not the number of calories, but what is it that your body has actually decided? If it stores fat, then you get fat. If it burns it for energy, then you don't get fat and you feel great. You have all this energy, you feel great, right? So obviously, the problem is not the number of calories. The problem is what your body is doing with the calories, which all depends on the hormones, because you don't get to choose. It's not a conscious choice. Oh, I'm going to store 1,000 calories and burn 1,000 calories. You don't get to choose that. So it's like this whole idea that, oh, it's about counting calories. It's like you're completely focused on the wrong thing. And it's really so easy to sort of disprove the myth. And there's actually huge studies that disprove it. But again, focusing on the hormones means that, hey, the foods that you eat influences your hormones, right? So the foods that you eat influences whether insulin goes up or insulin goes down. But other things too, like cortisol is another hormone that, affects the storage. Well, if you don't get enough sleep, your cortisol is up. You're under a lot of stress, right? Well, that's a problem. It has
And
nothing to do with calories.
you'll see fluctuations in your insulin when your cortisol is up, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And this thing is that, there's so many different aspects to why people will gain weight, right? Maybe it's insulin, maybe it's cortisol, maybe it's sleep, maybe it's ultra processed foods, maybe it's, food addictions. Food addictions, I want to come back to that because that's actually super, super important. But there's all these things, right? And I always think it's funny because when you talk to the standard thinkers, so all these calorie bullies are like, it's all about calories. It's like, cut your calories, cut your calories. It's like, so if your problem is too much ultra processed foods and you got fat because you ate too much ultra processed foods, then what's the solution? If you ask these calorie bullies, it's cut your calories. It's like, what are you talking about? You ate too much ultra processed foods, you need to eat less ultra processed foods, right? Or if the problem is that you're not getting enough sleep, then the solution is eat fewer calories? No, the solution is get better sleep, right? Or if the problem is that, you have food addictions, then you need to deal with the food addiction, not eat fewer calories, right? That's like telling a heroin addict, oh, your problem is heroin in minus heroin out. Is that actually useful? No, it's not. Like, deal with the addiction. So food addiction is actually this really, really interesting topic that there's all this data on. And it's so good because what is become obvious is that, especially with ultra processed foods, is that it can easily tip over into an addiction. An addiction is basically where somebody, knows that it's bad for them and they can't stop it. But not everybody has to. So smokers, for example, not everybody gets addicted to smoking, but some people do. Not everybody gets addicted to alcohol. So it doesn't mean that every single person who eats Cheetos gets addicted, but some can. And what it means is that they can't stop themselves from continuing it because of the high that they get or whatever it is, right? And people sometimes say, well, it can't be addictive because it's natural. It's like, well, that cigarettes come from tobacco leaves and heroin comes from plants and narcotics like, Percocets and stuff, they come from opium, right? Alcohol is distilled from grains and other things, right? So it's not the natural product. It's that you've processed it into this addictive product. So foods can be exactly the same. Natural foods are almost never addictive. And the thing is that when you realize that, hey, it just means that some people need to be addicted to be a problem. And then if you've ever watched these shows, like those 1,000-pound person shows, what you realize is that these people are completely addicted, right? They cannot stop because they're addicted to those foods. The same way that a heroin addict cannot stop heroin. They know it's going to kill them. They don't care because they're addicted. They don't have that control. And what it means is that you need to treat those people like a real addiction. That is, you have to treat it with abstinence. You have to treat it with other things, right? So if somebody has an addiction to alcohol, first thing is that no more alcohol, right? But that's not what the advice you give to a food addict, right? Somebody who's addicted to sugar, addicted to ultra processed foods, people will say, everything in moderation. That's like the stupidest advice to give to an addict. Like, you got to treat a food addiction as a real addiction, right? You would never say to your friend who's an alcoholic, who's addicted to alcohol, hey, come have a drink with me. Everything in moderation. Like, you'd be the worst friend ever, right? Or, hey, just have a little bit of cocaine. Like, you're going to send that person right down, spiraling down into a huge problem, right? But with food addiction, we are like, yeah, sure, everything in moderation. It's like, what are you talking about? If they're addicted, you need to treat it seriously like an addiction, right? And there's a whole field of addiction medicine that you can bring to bear on this, right? And it's like, but we don't treat people seriously. Yet they tell us, if you listen to them, I'm addicted to sugar, I'm addicted to chocolate, I'm addicted to pizza, I'm addicted to carbs. But does anybody say I'm addicted to meat? I'm addicted to salmon. I'm addicted to eggplant. No, because those are natural foods, right? It's when you get and you process them and you make them these ultra pure compounds with refined carbohydrates, you add the flavors and all that, then you get a Cheeto, and some people will not be able to stop. But you got to treat it seriously. So you got to identify the addiction, then you got to say, okay, let's treat it, right? Stop it completely. You have to stop because you're addicted. You are going to start and you will not be able to stop. So let's do it, right? But people aren't getting the help that they need because we never took it seriously. And now there's these Yale food addiction scores that you can now quantify it. Turns out a massive number of these people with weight problems have food addictions. It's like, I'm not sure why we're surprised by that. But it's like,
Hmm.
let's take it seriously. So that's another sort of burgeoning area of research that's really, taken off, that I think really needs to be emphasized. I talk about it as part of hedonic hunger because it really falls in that sort of, you're not eating because you want nutrients. You're eating it because you're really just addicted to it.
Yeah. No, I feel like that's a good way to end this off because it's a good place to think about this food for thought, no pun intended. Like a lot of people listening to this that's gonna strike a nerve. They're gonna be relate to that food addiction. And I haven't heard it presented that way, Jason, in terms of, hey, if this was booze, if this was narcotic, you would abstain. You wouldn't just be playing around with it because you hear that all the time, the moderation approach, and maybe you get there eventually, but at least if you're going to get a grip on this, to me, what you're saying makes the most sense. Like keep it out of the house, trying to avoid it, abstain, and then reset because these are powerful weapons. But
And you got to recognize it too, right? Because if you recognize that you're addicted to this substance, then you know you shouldn't do it. But then every doctor, every dietitian is telling you, oh, you can take a little bit of, the pizza or whatever. It's like, but I told you I'm addicted to pizza. Why are you telling me I can have some? And they're like, everything in moderation. It's like,
absolutely. But Jason, listen, thank you very much for this. Every time I sit with you, I learn something. You know what actually is going to be a game changer for me that I'm going to apply is the calorie in equation with the fat storage and calorie out and burning the calories. Cause that image, everyone can relate to that. It's like, are you storing it as fat or are you burning it? And the hormones are going to help you decide which way things are going to go. And it makes so much sense because the way I've always used the hormones is like I felt like it dialed up well, essentially mostly dialed up the calories. So like,
yeah,
yeah, you
yeah,
might be having a cookie that's 100 calories or whatever, but because it's halogenic that what might be normally 100 calories for you is now 200 calories, just random number or whatever.
yeah,
But this to me actually is a better way of kind of presenting it. Is it going into this box or that box? But
yeah.
ultimately, Jason, like I said, always learning something. Really appreciate the Hunger Code. Got my own copy, and we also got the Obesity Code and the Diabetes Code that are like game-changing books that people often come to me for. Where do they get to learn more about what Jason is doing? Where do they get the book? All things Jason Fung.
You can go to my website, drjasonfung.com. That's DOCTOR, or you can go to my social media. Just look under, like on YouTube, under Jason Fung, or Twitter, any of those. I'm happy to.
Where are you most active these days?
Probably on Twitter, x.com. I mean, I don't do as much social media as I used to just because during COVID, there's a lot of rancor. It was very negative space. So I sort of pulled back quite a bit from that. So I did a lot of YouTube for a while because I was trying to get give people the information. And YouTube's a great tool because, of course, they can learn and people can watch it whenever they want. It's free for them. They can watch it, they can repeat it, they can replay it, they can do anything, right? So it's actually a great educational tool for people. And so that's I did spend some time there, but it's actually very time consuming to make videos and stuff. It's actually a lot of time. So but there's a lot there that's, if you want to learn anything, basically anything that's in the books is probably on YouTube, right? I have a blog as well. If you go to Substack, you can, follow me there as well.
Thank you so much for this. We really appreciate having you on, Jason.
Thank you so much.